Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the invitation from the Academy. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you, Professor Laszlo, for inviting me. I will not talk about the same topic that you hear already. I will address what I know, what is my professional life, energy, and more particularly energy geopolitics, which is of course linked to climate, you know, the relation. I worked 36 years in Directorate General Energy of the European Commission, and I am passionate about EU. I am really in favor of the EU. But I'm afraid that what we have seen those last 10 years is just the destruction of what we have built during 60 years. The situation today is so different of the situation 10 years ago. 10 years ago, a lot of people were enthusiastic about the EU. I'm Italian, and I know how Italians were believing in the EU. Today is the reverse. And because I like the EU and I want to save the EU, I will not stop to say that we are wrong in what we are doing in energy policy. It's why I'm saying that we are misleading the population with energy policy. And if you look at the geopolitical situation, then you realize the disaster in which we are. Since 2003, I'm teaching energy geopolitics. And of course, I'm looking what is going around about energy geopolitics. And I will try to show you a few things that show how wrong we are in the EU with our today policy. I hope I will manage that, yes. All my data are available. I have no secrets. You can find everything in Eurostat or in Institute. But I want to start with something which I've never done in public. I do that with my student. But because the situation, today's situation, even here in Hungary, of course in Europe, I want to tell you something that I'd never say before in public. I was in charge in the European Commission about climate change and environment. For 12 years, I was working on improving the environment with technologies and research. And one day I've been called by my general director saying, "You are the only one serious about the environment here. You should work on environment only." And I shift from technology, research, development to environment. It was 1 year before COP1. That means that I've accumulated a lot of information since 1994. I was teaching in the European University, in Brussels University, free university, for 18 years, giving the same course on energy geopolitics and energy policy. Of course, adapting to the situation, practical situation. And one day, I discovered this. A petition from Green students to criticize me for what I'm teaching after 18 years. Interesting to note that I was retired, and at the university they told me, "We found nobody to replace you. Would you like to continue to teach? But we don't pay you because you are retired." Say, okay, I'm not doing that for the money. I'm not interested in money. I'm interested to share what I've learned with my student. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then arrived this petition. Say, okay, if you don't want me, no problem, I can stop. I will stop to work for free. Why I explain that? Because it's important to realize that today it's not allowed to say what we are saying in this room. And this is not science. This is not freedom. The main association of students which organized this coup against me was the free thinker. You imagine? The free thinker prohibiting somebody to teach, which I'm teaching since 18 years. It's difficult, it's serious. We need to fight against this. It's why thank you the Academy to allow us to speak. Okay, let's talk about energy. First of all, we have to say what is energy. Because if you don't know what it is energy, we will mislead everybody. You learn that, you are scientists, you know that energy is the same notion of work. Work is the displacement of a force. If you want to work, you need energy. Joule. Work is joule, energy is joule. This is the energy of the past. Muscular energy, they call that today. The green are saying we should return to muscular energy. In Europe, we stop. But in the world, it's still a reality today. Muscular energy is a reality. Do you think that those people have to continue like that? They want to stop muscular energy. Because the situation will not change until the moment we recognize what the EU have said since the beginning. In 1955, they met in Sicily, in Messina, to prepare the next stop of the ECSC treaty. And the resolution say, there will be no future for the community, today we say the union, without cheap and abundant energy. And I keep repeating that. In my smartphone, I just 3 letters to have the complete sentence. If you don't understand there will be no future for your life and for African life without cheap and abundant energy, we are misleading. You know, I will come back to that. The Trump administration has published Friday a new strategy for security. Look at the number of times they are mentioning this, cheap and abundant energy. Somebody told me they are reading your books in Washington. It's not true, because they know more than me. In this graph, I published this graph, you can find them. In this graph, I plot the energy per capita, joule per inhabitant, with the life expectancy. You cross the table of energy with the table of United Nations, and you have this graph. And you see that if you don't use a lot of energy, you have a low expectation life. And as soon as you increase, you improve your expectation life. We, in Europe, we are here. Those countries are the wasting country, which is so cheap and so they waste energy, the Gulf countries. But most of the African countries are here. And of course, this is inhuman. You cannot accept that. People have a right to life. The only solution is to use more energy. Similar graph, but with all different data. Here I plot the Human Development Index. It's a benchmark of the United Nations, which try to quantify the performance of life, gender equality, sanitation, education, and so on. And you see that we have the same graph. If you don't use energy, you have a very bad quality of life. You need to have a minimum of energy to improve your quality of life. So what is the future for energy, you believe? Just increase, massive increase. Because the population is growing, that means that more people need to work, more people need to eat, and more people need to have a good quality of life. The demand of energy will explode. Indeed, it is what is happening since years. And you see that demand of primary energy is increasing constantly. With few exceptions, crisis. When you have crisis, there is no work. No work, no energy. The beginning is the crisis of the oil shock in the 70s, then the subprime crisis in USA with strong impact in Spain, for example, and then the COVID crisis, deep stop of the economy, and then we start again. It will continue to increase except if we have crisis. And nobody wants crisis, certainly not the politician, because it's very bad for them. Which type of energy do we use? All. To satisfy such a great demand of energy, you need everything. You cannot say, I don't like this. And you see that we increase the demand for oil a lot. You remember in the 70s we were saying that oil is finishing? Wrong. Look at the demand of gas, how it has exploded. Coal, we think that in Europe coal is finished. What a joke. Nuclear is increasing, and of course, wind and solar are increasing. It's a fact. We need to acknowledge that wind and solar are growing. But all the rest is growing also. Where? Well, not in the EU. Because we are reducing our energy demand, because we are not working enough. The real growth is here, in Asia. Nearly 50% of our energy demand is in Asia. China, of course, but more and more, India. With this morning, my wife was surprised when I told her that there is more Indian than Chinese. So this will continue to increase. You see the black here is Africa. This is not sustainable. Sustainable development means that Africa needs to increase if you want to respect humankind. And I have to say that for many years, the European Commission was working rightly to provide cheap and abundant energy. During the tenure of Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the Commission, he was working to ensure that we will have a complete, flexible gas market. And we were financing a complete network in order that any methane molecule entering into any part of the EU can go any part in the EU. For example, a molecule coming from Nigeria and Spain should go also to Varsovia. Well, if French allow, because French do not want, but it's another story. So the idea was, you see, the number of countries surrounding the EU with natural gas was allowing us to have a positive vision on the energy demand. We were working a lot on that. It has been a success. Maybe we have a word on what is happening here, if we have time. And during the first mandate of Mr. Trump, Jean-Claude Juncker went to Washington to negotiate to import more shale gas in Europe. And it was advertised in the Commission media. in the press release of the European Commission, we will import more gas from USA. What is the situation globally today in the EU? You see that we are depending a lot on fossil fuel, coal, oil, gas. 75% of our energy is fossil fuel. We are lucky because we are 14% of nuclear energy. But what everybody mentioned, wind and solar, represent 5%. Not because of climate change, but because the oil shock of the 73s, our willingness to abandon oil and coal and so on, is not because of climate change. It was because we had the problem with the oil supply in 1973 and 79. It's then that we start to work on alternative energy, not because climate change. So it's more than 50 years that we are working on energy transition. And after 50 years, 5%. In the world is worst, because in the world, wind and solar is 3%. Stop to leave people saying that there is a lot of wind and solar in the world. That's not true. 3%. The reality of energy in the world is fossil fuel. 87%. In a lot of paper, you will find 80%. I cannot have time. I have no time to explain you, but it's wrong. It's 87%. How do you expect that from day 1 to day 2 we will reduce the 87%, when since 50 years we have not been able to reduce it? Ladies and gentlemen, the future of the world is fossil fuel. You like it or you don't like it, it's the same. But then arrived the Commission, the new Commission after Mr. Juncker, with Mr. Timmermans. No future for fossil fuel. And Mrs. von der Leyen, we don't need any more gas. You remember that I showed you the graph of Mr. Juncker saying that we were working on gas? And suddenly, no, this was wrong. No more need. And in the European Parliament, she said that the growth model centered on fossil fuel is obsolete. The 87% model is obsolete. And you see the President of the Parliament very happy for this statement. Do you know this man? Philippe Lamberts, Belgian, member of the European Parliament for 10 years, leader of the Green Party. He was really fighting against everything except wind and solar. Do you know where he's working nowadays? He is the personal advisor of Mrs. von der Leyen. Mrs. von der Leyen is surrounded by Mr. Lamberts, Mrs. Ribera, former Minister of Spain, Mr. Dan Jacobsen, anti-nuclear man, and von der Leyen. 4 people in the Berlaymont building are fighting against nuclear energy. This is the EU policy today. Therefore, I will present you the EU policy. This has been published. This is a document of the EU. I have not invented this document. This is a document which has been published immediately after the war in Ukraine, saying how are we going to react to Ukraine with our energy policy. First thing, more energy efficiency. Yes, this was already the case 50 years ago, when we say we need to make energy saving. Very old technology. Second thing, hydrogen. I don't know if I have time, but I want maybe say a few words about hydrogen. A really ridiculous policy. Ridiculous policy. Because it does not respect the law of chemistry and thermodynamics. Third thing, more non-Russian gas. Of course, if you want to be free from Russia, we need to import more gas from other parts. Then, more wind and solar. 50 years policy, huh? Nothing new. There is nothing new, huh? It's just you multiply the wind machine and that's all. Well, maybe they are told, but it doesn't change. This is not a rupture. And then, importing from Ukraine electricity and hydrogen. Nearly 100% of electricity in Ukraine is produced with nuclear and coal. Two taboo in the EU. And of course, EU is not producing hydrogen. You imagine Ukraine. But this was introduced to please Mrs. Babcock, the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Germany. It's ridiculous. All this is ridiculous. But they are going to spend 350 billion on that. What is missing in this slide? What is missing? Yes, clever, of course. It's not clever. But what is missing? Fossil fuels. Fossil fuel. Nuclear. Not one word on nuclear energy in this strategy. We have a treaty, I will show you that immediately, which obliges the Commission to deal with nuclear energy. It's an obligation. No mention of nuclear. Of course, Germany, leading this strategy, cannot accept that we mention nuclear. You imagine the nightmare in which we are? So what is the situation after 10 years of propaganda on energy transition? I published data, everything is public, no secret. The EU has, in the last 10 years, reduced its demand by 6.1 exajoule. We are proud to reduce our energy consumption. The only thing which have increased a little bit is the green technology, and all the rest have decreased. And outside the EU, the demand have increased by 77 exajoule, and just by case, it's easy to remember, 77% of the increase is fossil fuel. In the world, fossil fuel is increasing 7 times more than renewable energy. And you remember that we have seen a graph with a big gap between fossil fuel and renewable? This gap is growing. Yes, wind and solar are growing, of course. But the rest is growing much more, 7 times more. Because people need energy. And abundant energy and cheap energy. And this cannot be wind and solar. Do we have enough fossil fuel for the future? I made my PhD because I was told that there is no more oil, and that in 2000, the reserve should be here. Why the reserves are increasing? Because of the technology. What we have today to produce oil is science fiction 15 years ago. Because we have enlarged geography with offshore and new territories, and because the price of energy is increasing. If the price of energy is increasing, it's more economic to produce where it was not economic in the past. So it's a simple law of economy. If the price of energy increases, you discover more. And you have the reality which is there. Same thing for gas. And gas is the surprise of energy of this century. Gas is abundant. It's available everywhere, in all the continent, in many countries. Gas is cheap and clean. All the restaurants are using gas to cook because it's clean. And I have no time to enter into the details. There is no geopolitics of gas. It's one of my best questions for my student, my preferred question. Explain me why there is no geopolitics of gas. Why there cannot be a cartel like OPEC. There will never be a cartel on gas. 10 points for this question. But there is a big change. It's that we are free of the tubes, thanks to the transportation of gas by boat. And you see that today, the black line, we are marketing, trading more LNG than gas by tubes. That means that we are free from the supplier, and the supplier is free from the buyer. We are giving fluidity to the market of gas. And it's why we are only at the beginning of the gas tide revolution. You have seen maybe in the graph showing the 10 years change, you have seen that gas was the major one increasing, and it will continue. One of the main suppliers of gas is Qatar. And I say to my students not to forget that Qatar is the Saudi Arabia of gas. And of course, they are selling gas to everywhere. Long-term contract. 30 years, 20 years contract to be sure that countries will have gas. And they are proud to sell gas everywhere. This slide is not totally correct anymore because the new Saudi Arabia of gas is no more Qatar. It's USA. The shale oil and shale gas revolution is impressive. We are only at the beginning of the revolution because the shale oil and shale gas has been developed by this man, George Michael, a Greek, the son of a Greek immigrant in Texas. And he was fighting because everybody knew that there is shale oil and shale gas. Geologists know that. But how to produce it? It's fascinating, the story of that. If we have time one day, I can explain that. And he discovered the technology at that point, 2008. He discovered the technology and changed the pattern of energy production in USA. When he discovered the technology, he was a small team, small company. He said, I need to have other people with me. And he hired Chris Wright, oil and gas engineers. And with the know-how of Chris Wright, they improve the technology. This is new technology, you know, where there was no big companies. The Exxon and Chevron were not there. They were not interested in small things. No, they bought the companies and they introduced the big know-how of those companies. It's why I tell you that we are only at the beginning. Look at this picture. Whom do you see on the left? The same guy, Chris Wright. You know what is his position? Secretary of State of Energy of Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump picked the best man which have made a revolution in USA. Trump have made nothing, but he's clever in communicating. He has understood that the shale oil, shale gas revolution is a drastic geopolitical change to the point that we are importing in Europe shale oil and shale gas. So it's the reason why Mr. Trump is able to negotiate the Abraham Agreement, because we don't need oil and gas from Middle East. Finished. So the Middle East have understood and say, okay, we will negotiate, possibly a peace with Israel, we'll see, but certainly some peace with some countries. Yes, the real transition is changing the world, not the wind and solar. You remember that in 1973, we had a big oil shock, tremendous. We have been really suffocated by OPEC. And the the USA and Europe at that time say, we need cheap and abundant energy, so we need to react. And Mr. Kissinger has created the International Energy Agency based in Paris. And for so many years, the IEA was the center of knowledge of energy, publishing every year the World Energy Outlook. Fantastic job for many, many years. Until Paris Agreement, when the IEA shift completely and become green, totally green, with all the report only saying that we will abandon fossil fuel and everything, and nuclear, of course, and everything will be wind and solar. And people knowing energy, or what I've told you, were boiling. How is it possible that such a brilliant institution made such a lie? But it was impossible to react, because it's like a bulldozer working always on the same thing. We were disappointed. I wrote an article on that, it's public. I wrote a lot of articles criticizing the IEA, criticizing the shift of the IEA, not the IEA. Until the moment that Mr. Chris Wright say, it's finished. You stop your green dogma, or we leave the IEA. A few months ago, it was in July. And of course, IEA cannot afford to lose USA. Not only they cannot afford to lose USA, but at the end, they need to be realistic and not continue to lie. Sorry, what's happened? Yes, Mr. Chris Wright got his will. So IEA returned to the previous situation, and I think this is very bad for a prestigious institution that was knowing what was energy, and because of COP21 Paris, have abandoned rationale. One day, it will be the same for climate change, you know, because we cannot continue to say that we are going to do everything without fossil fuel. It's just impossible. 2 weeks ago, the Export-Import Bank of USA announced that they will spend $100 billion to achieve the energy dominance of the USA. Any American molecule, energy molecule, can be delivered in any corner of the world. This is the strategy of the US administration. We have so much energy in USA that stop with the geopolitics of threat on energy. We will deliver the energy that the world wants, cheap and abundant energy. And it's why Mr. Trump is not afraid to play a game with the EU. You remember the meeting in Scotland, in the golf resort? with Mrs. von der Leyen obliged to listen to lesson about the craziness of the windmill without reacting. This is the reality today, you know, not what the media are saying. And she was obliged to accept to buy 700 billion of US energy. Of course, shale oil, shale gas, and nuclear energy. Everything that she detests, that she do not want. How do you want to have a positive image of the EU? And of course, gas is trading everywhere, and we are only at the beginning to create a complete market. I will pass this. Another thing which we are misleading is on coal. You see the demand of coal in China? This is the demand of coal in USA in yellow. You know why it's decreasing? Because shale gas is so cheap that it's cheaper to produce electricity with gas, you imagine, than with coal. And interesting to see that in dot line you have the EU total energy demand, and behind this blue line here is the total coal consumption in the world except China and India. A strong reality. Last year, Mr. Narendra Modi announced that he is pleased to achieve a remarkable feat because we have produced 1 billion tons of coal. He's proud to produce so much coal. What is the consequence on CO2 emissions? I published that graph also in my books. In green, you have the CO2 emission of the EU. We will reach net zero 2050. This is India. Today, India have the same emission of the EU. If India continue with the same trends, and they have, because there is so much people which have no access to energy, cheap energy and abundant energy, so they are going to reach this point. You see the gap? We are killing ourselves for nothing. But if India reached the same energy consumption per inhabitant as the EU, they will reach this point. Anyway, one of the two will be the reality, or between the two will be the reality. So our limitation of CO2 are ridiculous. Nobody mentioned about Indonesia. This is the coal production in Indonesia, in green, first exporter of coal in the world. And in yellow, the coal consumption, first country for nickel production, so they need massive coal consumption. And of course, they abandon all illusion about climate change. And they say that clearly. We are not interested in climate change. Really, frankly, it's time to come back to earth and to admit that the EU is destroying its economy in wanting to reduce the CO2 emissions when the rest of the world do not care. How did it start? It started in 2006. I was in charge at that time on renewable energy. And I remember perfectly that Mrs. Merkel asked the President of the Commission, José Manuel Barroso, to prepare a roadmap to oblige the production of renewable energy. I was in charge of that. And we have developed the obligation to produce renewable energy. And then we arrived to 2009, when the Commission adopted the package Energy Climate, with Mr. Sarkozy being stupid enough to believe the Germans, because Sarkozy was thinking that in this strategy he will develop nuclear energy. He didn't realize that indeed everybody in Brussels was against nuclear energy. Big mistake of Mr. Sarkozy. And then you have the COP21 with people crying for the success of COP21. Failure, I will come back. And then arrive Mrs. von der Leyen, which have just abandoned everything and say the new strategy of the EU is not cheap and abundant energy, is decarbonization. That means destruction of our economy. It's why she asked Mr. Draghi to write a report. And I was very pleased to see the subtitle of the Mr. Draghi report, because he wants to prepare for the competitiveness. A few months before this report, I published this book, The Organized Destruction of the EU Competitiveness. If you don't have cheap and abundant energy, you destroy your economy. And you know the disaster in which we are. It's time to stop this dream of decarbonization, because the world is not interested. What is the reality since the Rio conference? I call the Rio conference COP0, because it's there that we decide to create COP. Look at the emissions. This is the the COVID. But except that, you see the CO2 are increasing. And then you see here the China. And in red here, you have Hungary. If Hungary reaches net zero, nobody will see it in the world. Hungary have reduced by 32% its CO2 emissions in 1990. Yes, good success. The EU by 30%. But the world have increased by 65%. You imagine an enterprise which have an aim to reduce its cost, and indeed they increase by 65%. Do you think that the CEO will remain in place? On energy policy, yes. You can continue to lie, to say to the people that you are changing the world. And Hungary represents 0.1% of the CO2 emission. I advise you to stop right away. I will pass this and say that really something is changing. Oil and gas are a gift of God, have said the president of COP29. The turning point has been Copenhagen 15, when the head of state met saying, we will reduce. And they realized that this is a catastrophe for their economy. It's why, 1 minute left, it's why COP15 was a total failure. And since then, COP30 is a failure, and everything is a failure. It's why I wrote this summer, this book, The Truth About the COP. 1 minute to my chronometer. Because I was there before COP1, I have all the information. And rapidly, I wrote this book explaining the joke that they are behind the COP. 30 years of lies and 65% of increase. It's time to stop. We cannot, I'm saying, we cannot wait COP99 to stop. It's time to stop and to come back to cheap and abundant energy. Thank you.